Welcome to this grab bag on scaffolding. Scaffolding is a useful method used to support students who are not yet experts towards being unguided and independent in their knowledge or in their skills. Here's what Barack Rosenshine said. Think about scaffolding on a house then. The scaffold is used during the building process and then it's removed once the building is complete. It's temporary. And this needs to be the case for our students and the scaffolding or the support we give them in their learning too. So scaffolding in the classroom gives time and opportunity for students to build long-term memories, mental schemas if you prefer, that they can then rely on instead of relying on external support, hints and tips and clues and reminders from either their peers or from the teacher. So let's think about how scaffolding could look different depending on the expertise of the learner. In our video on worked examples, we talked about how to use a worked example to introduce a novice to a new idea, a new skill or something like that. And a worked example is a really good type of scaffold for a novice. The teacher provides the problem, the process, the solution, and the students are prompted to think about isolated elements of that provided example. It could be that you give your students a fully written essay on the causes of the First World War, and then you say, okay, let's work through this and identify the key points being made. Why did I start the paragraph like this? Why have I chosen this quotation here? What does this source add to the argument? So the skills needed to produce a good final essay are being learned, but without the cognitive load imposed by giving the learner the whole task to do at the outset. Then for an intermediate learner, the teacher might take away one or more steps in the process, or maybe even take away the solution. And the teacher would do this once they were satisfied that some of those steps had been well learned, that is, confident that the skills are already embedded in the long-term memory of the students. For example, early on in the intermediate stage, it could be that the teacher gives an essay minus a conclusion and the students write the concluding paragraph. A bit later on in the intermediate stage, an essay plan could be given to the students. Each paragraph topic is given in advance, along with the conclusion that students have to come to. And then their job is just to write the essay. So that gives them the opportunity to focus on, for example, sentence structure, use of sources and quotations, but not have to worry about the additional load imposed by trying to marshal the information to form their own conclusions. Of course, they'll do that later. Then for a student approaching a more expert phase, you might leave only the problem and remove the scaffold almost entirely. So it needs to be a gradual process from structured to unstructured, rather than just going from total dependence on the teacher to completely independent working. So initially, in this expert end of the spectrum, we might initially ask the student to complete a task quite similar to the original task, perhaps similar to the one you provided as a worked example. That's known as near transfer. So in this instance, it might be write an essay on how World War I could have been prevented, for example. And then as they become even more expert and move along this pathway, we fade the scaffold even more. We might give them a task that requires them to transfer their understanding a little bit further, perhaps making connections to other domains of their learning. So whereas one is near transfer, this would be far transfer. Perhaps the essay could be, war is always unjustified, give examples to support your argument. And they would draw on that knowledge that they'd already gained, but in a much more independent way. What are the reasons then for scaffolding and fading? Firstly, cognitive load can be managed through the careful choice of scaffolded tasks. Novices, by definition, have less stored away in their long-term memories, and so complex tasks provoke an even greater burden on working memory than the same task done by an expert. So scaffolding allows them time to build those long-term schemas, which will ultimately move them towards expertise. Second, because the way the working memory relies on long-term memory, learning is what is known as generative. That is, the more stored away in long-term memory schemas, the more links there are for new information to connect with. So in practice, this means we start slowly and get faster. Third, scaffolding allows for effective transition to independence, which frankly is the whole purpose of education. We want our students to become increasingly independent. And scaffolding provides a way of understanding how to get there step at a time without overloading our students by dropping them in at the deep end. So how do we actually go about doing this? Well, here's a model that you might have heard of that's really useful. It's called I do, we do, you do. And this is intended to release students to independent practice, but manage their cognitive load in the process. So you might begin with worked examples and move towards independent practice as you fade that scaffold. So I do, the teacher models the skills, narrates the thought processes and so on. We do, the teacher uses questioning techniques to get students to think through the process or the skill. And effectively what you're doing there is you're collaborating in the recreation of the skill or the task. And the teacher could now ask questions like, okay, here's the essay question, where do we start? Or, okay, tell me what to do next, Jimmy. Or what step did we miss, Agatha? And so on. And then you do, this is the stage where our learners are predominantly working independently. And we can be even more precise about this if we wanted to. We could split the we do stage into I do, you help, where the teacher is predominantly in control but having help from the student, and then switching it around to you do, I help, where release of control is happening but the teacher's still on hand to help out. We could even split the you do stage into two as well. So students just moving into the expert stage might complete very similar but not the same tasks, similar to the ones perhaps that were done in the worked example as we've just mentioned, and then move to tasks that are less similar to the initial task. So near transfer and then far transfer. But here's the point now where the teacher can respond to the needs of the individuals in the group. If you've got a student who's flying, you can give them some more tasks to do that are a bit further away from the original example. In fact, at this point, continuing to give a student worked examples when they've developed a level of independence is actually counterproductive because they can learn to become reliant on the examples instead of developing fluency in the skill, and that's called the expertise reversal effect. Alternatively, if you've got a student who's struggling, no reason why you can't go back a little way and do another we do worked example with them, or a we do or a shared collaborative task or something like that, and set some tasks that require then a bit of near transfer of the skill. But that's it for this grab bag on scaffolding. I hope that's given you a bit of an insight on what scaffolding is and how it might be relevant for you. Any questions or comments or criticisms, please direct them my way. That'd be great. And take care for now. I'll see you in the next one.